I want to welcome all of my guests who are here today. I also want to especially acknowledge my daughter Dara, who is attending school in Jerusalem for a year and is listening with us as we speak, with the permission of the Secret Service, with the permission of the White House. Around here for the last week, whatever we did, we needed permission. I would like to share a short story with President Clinton. It's a story which many of my guests have heard before. Why doesn't, Nana, you have a chair. Okay. Just want to make sure. In 1922, in the town of Karelage, a small village in Poland which later became a part of Russia. This boy was the youngest of 8 children who grew up in a small 2-room house where his mother and his father earned modest livings as tailors. Money was scarce in this family, and as a result, Yossel never attended school except for a few years of cheder. He went to work at a very young age. Nothing was too hard and nothing was too difficult for this young boy, as long as he could earn a few rubles and help bring home a couple of dollars for his mother to help feed his family. The boy learned how to trade by going to the market square and buying a few eggs and trading them for a profit. And as soon as he was physically able, Yossel became an apprentice carpenter and worked wherever and whenever he could. Yossel grew up and was forced to become a man at the age of 15 when his father died of pneumonia. And at the age of 17, World War II started, and the Germans they occupied the area and proceeded to exterminate all of the Jews. Yossel witnessed the murders of his mother, 3 of his sisters, and several other family members. He was forced to work in a Nazi labor camp and later escaped to the forests with several of his siblings where they lived for over a year. Yossel himself actually survived day to day by hiding in a grave that he dug for himself. As the war came to an end, Yossel, having really lost much of his family, realized that he had no home, he had no town, he had no family really to return to. While living in the woods, Yossel joined the Jewish partisans, the resistance fighters, and there he met a beautiful girl named Reike from the neighboring town of Novogrudok. During the German occupation, Reike was confined to her town, which the Germans established as a ghetto for all the Jews of all the surrounding areas. She witnessed the murders of her mother, her brother, her sister, and several family members. Reike escaped from the ghetto with her father and sister through an underground tunnel which they built at night with their bare hands. Reike was actually one of 300 Jews who survived out of 30,000 Jews in the ghetto. Reike was one out of 300 Jews who survived out of 30,000 Jews in the ghetto. Yossel and Reike decided to marry and leave this place of such horrible memories. They traveled to Budapest, Hungary, where they were married by a rabbi in a ceremony with 20 other couples at the same time. And from their wedding, they illegally crossed the Alps and several borders and ultimately arrived in Italy in a displaced persons camp, otherwise known as a DP camp. They gave birth to a little girl named Hindel while they were at the DP camp. In 1949, this couple and their little girl came to America. They arrived on a Tuesday, and Yossel was working as a carpenter on Wednesday the next day. Yossel was ambitious, he was hardworking, he was motivated, and he was honest. Yossel often slept at night in the houses that he built so as to save money on transportation and so as to work each and every hour that he possibly could. He worked as a carpenter until such time that he saved a few dollars to go into the building business in 1954. Mr. President, this is not just a story. Yossel was my father, Olva Shalom, may rest in peace, and Reike is my mother, Ray Kushner, who we are fortunate to have with us here today. When I was born 43 years ago, in May 1954, my parents had gone into the building business only 2 months earlier. And at that time, my birth ceremony was in the Brooklyn hospital where I was born, and my parents borrowed $100 to pay for the ceremony. They simply didn't have the money. They didn't have the money. I am very proud to stand before you today and have the Kushner family host this event in honor of you and in honor of Jim McGreevey. I am proud to be an American and feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to support such great men of leadership, such great men of character, of conscience, and morals. I now would like to turn the program over to another Kushner generation, my son Joshua, who will present President Clinton with a token of appreciation from the Joseph Kushner Hebrew Academy. Although this week, Joshua told me he'd rather meet Michael Jordan as opposed to President Clinton. So I don't know if you want to take some from him.
Mr. President, it is both a privilege and a thrill to present this gift to you on behalf of Joseph Kushner Hebrew Academy and Kushner Yeshiva High School student bodies. This ritual shofar is a ram's horn blown in the synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the two holiest days on the Jewish calendar. The sounds it makes awakens us to engage in reflection and reaffirmation of our fundamental beliefs. We greatly value some of your fundamental commitments, especially your desire and efforts placed to reform the American educational system. We also appreciate your steadfast loyalty to Israel, the only democracy in the Mideast, and your steps to bring peace to that region without compromising Israel's security needs in the process. May this Jewish New Year usher in a year of health and meaningful living for all Americans.
Mr. President, and particularly to Charles, to Cyril, to Mrs. Kushner. When Charles talked movingly of his parents' travail, we rededicate ourselves to the uniqueness of the American vision, and particularly to the need to teach our children and to provide for that value structure. During the course of this campaign, we will hear about New Jersey having the highest auto insurance, the highest property taxes, the highest debt. But of grave concern is a recent review by a professor of Harvard University. Reviewed 28 states, their educational standards, and New Jersey was found to be dead last. To paraphrase John F. Kennedy 30 years ago, the human mind is our greatest resource. And as the First Lady has continued to note, 90% of a child's brain development occurs between birth and 3 years of age. And that is why we need to invest. Now, I've called for the establishment of Smart Start, the manner in which Governor Hunt has done in North Carolina, recognizing that if 90% of a child's mind develops during those 3 years, we need to invest accordingly. Smart Start would provide for child daycare, early education, maternal, as well as prenatal health care. In addition, New Jersey desperately needs full-day kindergarten. New Jersey spends more money than any other state per pupil capital expenditure, but we're dead last as a percentage that gets into the classroom. We need to reestablish our priorities to ensure that the magic of education is dedicated within the classroom. In addition, we need to provide schools that are state-of-the-art. We have 49 schools within the state of New Jersey that are over 100 years of age. And tragically, as state aid to school districts and municipalities diminish, it almost becomes a daily battle between senior citizens and young families to rebuild our schools and infrastructure. That is why I've called for a capital construction loan program, that school districts will be able to borrow monies through the State Economic Development Authority, long-term low-interest loans to be repaid during the course of the facility, such that school districts will be able to stabilize their debt service and provide state-of-the-art schools for our children. Fourthly, values. I am proud to have been the sponsor of the New Jersey state requirement to teach Holocaust education. Not merely to teach the Shoah as a chronological fact, but to understand the moral dimensions, the decisions that were made, and how the Holocaust ought to be a concern as a matter of fundamental humanity to every child. We not only need to teach the lessons of the Shoah, but help our children to understand the moral ramifications of those decisions. And to continue, we also need to teach our students the basic difference between right and wrong. Those basic values against which Charles' parents came to these shores to discover freedom and put their labors to productive use. And lastly, standards. As our president labors to establish standards of excellence for English and mathematics on a national basis, it's of grave concern that this governor has refuted the attempts to establish those standards. Indeed, New Jersey's core curriculum was found to be the worst standards of all states reviewed. I believe we shall reap what we shall sow. Our goal ought to be to set standards of excellence, set standards that challenge, so that every child within the state achieves his or her fullest potential. And now it is a great honor to introduce a man who is committed to excellence in education, who has understood the travels and travail of Joseph and Ray Kushner, and who's committed to teaching those principles not only in the schoolhouse, but from this nation's pulpit. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to present the President of the United States, President William Jefferson Clinton.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here for him and for our party and for what we're fighting for. I want to thank my longtime friend Alan Solomon for being here and for being the finance chair of our Democratic Party. And of course, you can clap for him. Somebody started clapping. I wish you'd do that. That's good. He has a thankless job. When he calls people, you know, even when he calls me, I think he's going to call and hit me up for a contribution any day. But most of all, I'd like to thank the Kushners, Charles and Cyril, and thank you, Ray Kushner, and thank you, Mrs. Felsen. And I thank the children who gave me the shofar. Joshua and Nicole, Dara, and Miriam, thank you. And I'm glad we got a long-distance connection to Israel. In a way, I always have a long-distance connection to Israel. President Weitzman, you know, was just here. We had a great visit, and of course, Mr. Arafat and Prime Minister Netanyahu had a visit of their own. And we're hopeful that the peace process is back on track, and so is that the security process is back on track, and I know all of you hope that as well, but we're working hard on it. Let me just briefly say that I came to New Jersey today for Jim McGreevey for what I think is a very good reason. It is entirely positive. There's nothing negative about it. And that is that in the next several years and for the foreseeable future in the 21st century, who happens to be governor of any state and what decisions they make will have a bigger impact on how people live than in the previous 20 years. As an inevitable outgrowth of the way the world is changing, the way we change how we govern ourselves, how we make decisions, and how we go forward. And I think it's very important. Let me say that a lot of you have helped me a lot over the last several years, and for that I am very grateful. I think we are much closer than we were 5 years ago to realizing the vision that I started out with when I announced for governor, for president. When I was a governor, I'm going to talk about that in a moment. That is, I think we're closer to the time when every American has a chance to live out the American dream if he or she will work for it. I think we're closer to the time when our country has articulated a vision that will maintain our world leadership for peace and freedom and prosperity and security. And I think we're closer to a time, although we still have a lot of challenges, in which we can reach across all the racial, the ethnic, the cultural, the religious lines that divide us and stand in stark contrast to what is going on in so much of the world today and to the terrible story that Charles told us that has such a wonderful ending of his family. By being a country that really can embrace all this diversity, celebrate it, respect it, honor it, and say we're still bound together as one America. And I feel very good about that. There's still a lot to do. There's a lot going on in Washington. I'm still trying for the 5th year in a row to pass the campaign finance reform. And the opponents thought they had killed it yesterday, but we've got a little life left in us up there. You can influence anybody. I hope you will, although I want to say that Senator Torricelli and Senator Lautenberg are part of a unanimous vote in our caucus for the McCain-Feingold bill and for campaign finance reform, which I very much appreciate. We're dealing with the trade issue and the question of the extension of the President's authority to conduct trade negotiations with other countries and then have the Congress vote up or down on the bills, which is essential for me to make those agreements and to continue to expand trade. Otherwise, no one wants to negotiate with 535 people. They want to negotiate with one person. And there's a lot of debate, and it's a healthy thing, because what we really want in the global economy is more involvement in the world economy in a way that benefits America, but also having our community make the appropriate response for people who have or will suffer as a result of dislocations in that economy. We owe that to them, and that's what we're trying to achieve. We had a fascinating conference this week on climate change. I'm convinced the climate is warming at an alarming rate, and that we have to do a responsible thing to lower our emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. But it's a difficult problem for a democracy to address because it's not on anybody's back right now. It's something that's out there ahead of us. But if we do a little bit now, we can avoid disastrous consequences and much more burdensome actions later. Hillary and I are going to have the first White House conference on child care at the end of the month. And that's a huge problem. We have more people in the workforce than ever before, a higher percentage of people in the workforce than ever before. But the most important job any of us have is our job to raise our children well. I know you believe that. I had more people in the line. We just all took our picture. I had a higher percentage of people in the line that I just stood in asked me about my family and my daughter than any photograph line I have ever stood in my whole life. And that's a great tribute to you and your values, and I thank you for that. But this child care issue is really about whether all these people who have to work and also have children can succeed at work and at home. And we shouldn't have our country making a choice there. We don't want to crater the economy, but our most important job is to raise our children well. So we're full of all these challenges, and it's exciting. But we have to, when I took office, we had this huge deficit and basically a yesterday's government. And I made a commitment, as I've said many times, to policies that favor the future over the past, change over the status quo, unity over division, and things that benefit everybody instead of just a few people. And that required changes. So we downsized the government. We shared more responsibility with state and local government and the private sector. And state governments anyway have primary responsibility for things like auto insurance rates and constitutionally education. So I can go out here and talk till I'm blue in the face about the importance of embracing national education standards. The United States is the only great country in the world that has no national standards of academic achievement that guarantee international capacity in terms of operating in the economy that everybody has to follow. We're not talking about federal government standards. We're not talking about imposing anything on anybody. It's totally voluntary. But that means that every governor will decide whether to participate in the standards movement. So the decisions made by the governor of New Jersey in the next 20 years almost certainly will range over a wider scope and have a deeper impact on the lives of the people of New Jersey than in the previous 20 years. And if my vision is going to be fulfilled, we have to have a partnership that really works to grow the economy, to fight crime, to preserve the environment, to deal with social problems, and most importantly, to make sure that every child in this country has a chance to live out his or her dreams with a decent education. That's why I showed up here today, because this young man actually has an idea of what he will do if he gets elected. He's not running for governor because he wants to live in that magnificent old house. New Jersey, I think, has the oldest and perhaps the most beautiful old governor's mansion in the country. He actually has an idea of what he wants to do, and I think it's the right idea. I hope you'll help him achieve it. Thank you. Bless you. Thank you all for being